Good evening, everyone. Thank you for being here for this exciting informative webcast, Integrating Volunteers into Your Animal Shelter Programs and Culture. I'm Lynn Fridley, Assistant Director of Education for Maddie's Fund. Our speaker is Paula Fasseas, founder of PAWS Chicago. With her business background, Paula developed a solutions-based plan to address the plight of homeless pets and raise public awareness in Chicago. The robust volunteer program at PAWS Chicago has enabled the organization to expand their reach and touch the lives of the people of the community and the pets that they love. Before we start, let's talk about a few housekeeping items. Please take a look at the left side of your screen where you'll see a Q&A window. That's where you'll ask questions during the presentation. But don't hold them until then. Questions asked in the last few minutes will probably not be processed in time for a response. If you need help with your connection during the presentation, you can click the Help widget at the bottom of your screen. The green file widget contains a printable certificate of attendance for people attending this live event, along with other useful resources. Tonight's webcast will be an interview format without a formal presentation. If you feel that you have missed some information, don't worry. The free on-demand version will be available for review within 1 day. So welcome, Paula. We're going to jump right in and ask our audience a poll question. So people out there in virtual webcast land, you should answer this poll question on your screen. Does your organization have volunteers? Yes, it is completely volunteer run. Yes, we have staff and volunteers. No, or not applicable. Please answer on your screen. And we're going to show you the results, and then we'll get a good sense of everybody that's in our audience. And here are the results. Wow, that's pretty astounding. 80% of you actually have staff and volunteers, and Paula's going to be talking about that a little later. Almost 17% of you actually are an all-volunteer-run organization.
Nice.
So very, very good. We're going to jump right in here. I want to tell you a little bit about PAWS Chicago because I was impressed with this number. PAWS Chicago has a core of 5,000 people in their volunteer program. In 2015 alone, volunteers logged over 117,000 hours. That's equivalent to 56 full-time employees. That's a lot. So, Paula, why is a volunteer program important?
Wow, it is the essence of no-kill. And I will tell you, we're very strong in the no-kill movement. We really believe in saving the lives of animals, and that we feel, that's our mission. And if you really, really want to save their lives, we know how costly it is to do the right thing for these guys, and there's no way you can really do it by having all staff. You would either have to be much, much smaller and save many less lives, or you'd probably have to be running more of a traditional shelter where animals, would be euthanized heavily. That's not acceptable to us, and we love our no-kill mission. We love saving the lives. We love growing our programs. And the only way financially we can sustain yourselves and really do this kind of work is by having a very robust volunteer program. So for us, we started out as an all-volunteer group, and I was basically, kind of got into this in a funny way. We wanted to save lives and raise awareness in the Chicago community, and we kind of just put on a little citywide event and invited the local rescues and shelters, and the next day I had like 55 people calling me going, we want to volunteer. What's the name of your organization? So the community kind of got us to start the organization. It was really initially meant to be an event, and we realized there were so many people in the community that wanted to help, that wanted to change the status quo for animals. So it was the community that got us to start saying, okay, well, let's do something. Besides just an event, let's run a little adoption program. And so we started out with all volunteers. And as we got bigger and bigger, we realized, of course, you need to have staff. It's critical to have quality staff. But the most important thing is that the staff you have really buy into the volunteer culture, because without that, it's never going to be successful. Really, it's so critical. So much of what we do is dependent on our volunteers, because we could not possibly pay people to do all the work. I mean, it would be financially impossible. Now, we spend an average of about $1,000 an animal at PAWS when we add up the cost, and that's with all the volunteers. You can only imagine, So in the life-saving work we do, the volunteers play a huge role in every facet of the organization.
Can you discuss the areas where these volunteers have played an important role and their impact? Obviously, it's monetarily wise, as you just mentioned.
Mm-hmm. I would say that every aspect, the only aspect we don't have volunteers right now, and we've had occasionally, is in our veterinarian staff. Because our spay-neuter clinic is very high volume, a volunteer vet would come in and would just be overwhelmed. They can occasionally help and assist, but usually that is pretty much a staff-run program, is our high-volume spay-neuter and our shelter medicine. Although we do have, thanks to Maddie's fund, we've had a lot of residents and support that way. But really, as far as PAWS, every department of PAWS Chicago has volunteers very actively involved in either managing things or in implementing. And so starting out, I could start off with our adoption program. About 90% of our adoptions, and we did close to 6,000 adoptions last year, were all done by trained volunteers. So follow-up calls, we have part-time staff person, but a lot of volunteer involvement in the follow-ups. And we're always looking to grow the volunteers aspect so that we could do more for the animals and more for the community. So that's the adoption program alone. We also have in our dog walking, all of the dog walks, except for some of our level 3 dogs, which are our dogs that are a little more, at risk. We have to have specially trained volunteers or staff handle the level 3 dogs for walking. But all of the other dog walking is done with volunteers, helping with cleaning, feeding. We have incorporated them in our medical facility. We have a separate medical facility from our adoption center. So we have isolation and quarantine areas in which volunteers are trained to work with our vet tech staff, and they're specially trained and certified to be able to go into these areas. They gown up and work with animals that have highly contagious illnesses. So, that's, again, it comes down to a lot of really good training and, of course, having the staff understand and have the buy-in. I think that's probably the most challenging yet most rewarding area, is when the two integrate beautifully and there's this wonderful symbiotic relationship between our volunteers and our staff. And I think at PAWS, that's what really makes our program so successful.
So as a follow-up to that, Paula, are there instances where your staff and volunteers really don't see eye to eye, and how do you solve that issue?
Yeah, basically we have had and we do get occasionally people, and a lot of it is communication. So we had a meeting recently, and one of the employees said, well, isn't it, you keep talking about more volunteer programs, and is that going to put our jobs at risk? And I thought, wow, I said, no, actually that's going to ensure your job, because what ensures your job is the fact we have more volunteers so we can continue growing. Because we can't grow and we can't, raise more money and we can't save more lives if we don't have volunteer support. So the staff that we have, a good way for them to look at this is that it ensures your position rather than jeopardizes it. And we do oftentimes hire from our volunteers staff. So if we have a staff position open and volunteers apply, we always like to hire people that we know their work ethic. Because let's face it, this is hard work. This takes passion. This takes love of animals. This is not 9 to 5. It is it's a labor of love, and people, we have staff that come and volunteer after work hours because they love it so much. We have, volunteers that work all week and, they spend their weekends at PAWS. It's a labor of love and passion, and that's the kind of culture we want to maintain. So I think when we do have a few, staff people in the past or have had that kind of roll their eyes about this and, it would be so much easier if we didn't have to deal with volunteers, they really don't understand the culture. They don't understand the big picture. They don't understand the financials. We're doing a bad job communicating with them. And so as leadership in PAWS, our job is to communicate that. And if they still don't get it, then you know what? They're just not a fit for this organization. So not everybody's always the perfect fit. So they have to embrace that. And sometimes when you have staff that come from large organizations that don't have a volunteer culture, and, some of these bigger organizations, especially the nationals, they have a lot more staff, and then they do volunteers because they're not doing as much hands-on work with animals, then I think, it's just it's a disconnect. So basically, you really have to find people, employees and staff that really embrace the culture. And that's why lots of time hiring from the volunteer when you're looking is great because they are volunteers. They know the value, they know the passion, and they have great respect for the volunteers too.
Well, that's great. I was really impressed, Paula, about PAWS Chicago's volunteer opportunities, which cover everything from A to Z. I mean, the list was very, very long, and this includes helping with medical care, PAWS for Life outreach, helping outdoor cats, volunteer training and mentorship, adoption centers and events, working with dogs, working with cats, humane education, operational support, and, of course, foster homes, who took in almost 3,000 pets in 2015. What lessons have you learned over the years about recruiting and retaining volunteers? What worked and what didn't?
Well, I will say, as far as recruiting, we're constantly recruiting. Now, we are very fortunate because our adoption center is located in a wonderful area in Chicago called Lincoln Park. And there are so many young professionals and young people that are passionate about animals in Chicago. We have literally hundreds of people at our orientation sessions. So we are so lucky that we are a great feeder for volunteers by our location. But other ways we've done it, because we also now have a North Shore Adoption Center, which has been very successful in attracting volunteers, and we're constantly growing that program. But I would suggest for people to think just out of the box. I clearly remember when I was in grad school, and I was just about ready to get my MBA, I saw an ad in our school newspaper. I was at the University of Chicago, and it said, we're recruiting board members for a cat shelter. And I remember at the time thinking, I love animals. Wouldn't I love to do something for animals, as a volunteer? And I thought, had that not been in that, go to your universities, go to your graduate schools, and put little ads in their newspaper. Put flyers everywhere, whether it's a Starbucks or we're looking for volunteers, because you just never know who's going to see that and call you up and walk in your door and be, amazing. We have volunteers still with us that have been with us from the day we opened our doors at PAWS, and that's pretty amazing. So it's going on 20 years.
That's great. As far as retaining volunteers, Paula, are there some specific ways that PAWS Chicago acknowledges and thanks its volunteers and are particularly unusual or effective?
Yeah, that's an interesting point. We do it, but I will tell you what the volunteers tell us is you don't need to thank us. We thank you for having this organization here that we can do this work. We do a volunteer appreciation party every year. We do a barbecue. We were giving awards out. We do it, it's probably the least of what the volunteers care about, what they really like. And I think the most important thing we do is that we give them meaningful work. We don't say, first of all, you won't see signs at PAWS, and when you do, I tear them down if they say staff only, because we don't believe there isn't anything, that volunteers can't do. It's just training. So if only only staff can handle a level 3 dog, well, it just means that we need a volunteer to be trained the same way. In fact, we've had some situations where our volunteers were better trained than our staff because we had a lot of new staff. So until the new staff gets trained up, it's the level 3 volunteers that actually help the staff. So we do have really good training programs and integration of volunteers in every aspect of the organization. So I think one of the areas that is most astounding is our training program. So as a no-kill shelter, we have a full-time director of trainer who's fantastic. And she has, so we have two full-time trainers, Joan, who is our director, and her assistant. And they are full-time just working with our internal animals, our adopters. Someone may have adopted 5 years ago, experiencing some issues, they can always call. We offer the support. But our existing animal population, we divide up our dogs into 3 levels, level 1, 2s, and 3s. And Joan, our trainer, works with our volunteers to the level 2 and 3 level. So level 1s come in, and it's basically they can handle, easy to handle puppies and dogs that are no-brainers. The level 2s are maybe the more, rambunctious dogs that, we want to be careful that they're not, they don't knock someone over. So we have level 2 volunteers that are trained by Joan, our trainer. And then level 3s are the dogs that probably a lot of shelters would be putting down because maybe they've bitten. They need some behavior modification. They need some extra work. They're fearful. We want to build confidence. We have a large number of level 3 volunteers. I'm going to say right now it's probably around 35 to 40. And those volunteers are highly trained. They come in, they do play groups, they work with these dogs. These dogs are very successfully adopted. They do follow-up. They do a lot of the meet and greet so that we make sure they're set up for success. And they are all trained by Joan, our trainer. And then they, in turn, will also train others. So it's kind of like, you have 1 or 2 amazing employees that run that training department, but we've got about 60 volunteers that are working daily in play groups, whether it's at our medical center or at our adoption center, and working with the dog. So it's really the trainers that are training our volunteers. And they all have levels. They have different apron colors. So it's very much an organization that really engages teaching, training, improvement, and integration at every level. So our volunteers, will stay. We retain them because they are constantly learning and growing.
Excellent, Paula. We have another poll question. Before we jump into this poll question, though, I'd like to remind the audience that we'd like to get questions from you on volunteer programs. So if you have any questions for Paula on volunteer programs, please submit them in the Q&A box. So the second poll is, do you experience conflicts between staff and volunteers? That'd be yes, no, or not applicable. So please answer on your screen, and we'll take a look at the results in just a second, give you a chance to get your answer in. Do you experience conflicts between staff and volunteers? Well, it's a good thing you went over that, Paula, because 73% of the audience has experienced conflicts, and almost 14% have not. So hopefully your advice will help the people here.
Yeah.
Great. Okay.
Yeah, it's common. And it's communication for sure. I mean, that is so important. And really, you're not going to convince everybody. Not everybody is a fit for an organization that's very volunteer driven. You need to recruit the people that get it. And when they get it, they can see the big picture, and it's usually people that are growth-oriented, that are positive, that have that positive attitude, and are confident in themselves. And one more thing I do want to mention that I think is really important is that every one of our staff, part of their job description is integration of volunteers. So at every level of the organization, everyone has to understand their role is integrating volunteers. And I think when that expectation is right up front and they understand that's part of what they have to do, and then I think it makes it a lot easier.
Thanks, Paula. I had a question from the audience, and actually they wanted to know, and this is kind of funny because we always talk about length of stay in a shelter, and usually we're talking about the animals. But what is the average length of stay for your volunteers? I know you said you have some long-term ones that have been there ever since you started the program, but what is the average length of stay?
I don't know that I have that number. I do know that We do constantly recruit new ones. When we lose some of our long-term, it's usually because they've moved away. And what's really great is that they stay in touch with us, and whatever shelters they're volunteering where they move to, they try to bring a lot of the culture and a lot of the things they've learned through PAWS to their shelter. And we often will have them calling us, or some of the volunteers will bring some of the staff over. We'll give them tours. We'll talk about it. We'll share materials for them, because those volunteers want to see the shelters and the towns they've moved to do the same thing where they came from PAWS.
And what kind of training do your volunteers go through when they just walk in the door at PAWS Chicago and want to be a volunteer?
Yep.
I know.
Okay, so the first thing they do is they have an orientation, and that's done by volunteers. Our volunteers run all of our orientations. They see a video. They learn about no kill. We want them to know from day one our mission, why we're here, why we started, why it's so important that our program is successful for the sake of the animals, and why we have to sustain what we're doing and continually grow, because the animals' lives are at stake. So I think getting that whole mission and getting that focus is number one. The volunteers become very motivated from day one. And then they choose. They're given a whole selection of opportunities, whether it's cats, dogs, or both, adoption counseling, working at the medical center. They had a whole list, and then they sign up. They then go, depending on what they've chosen to do, they will work directly and be mentored by volunteers. So, for example, if they choose to be a level 1 dog town, they would go and they would be mentored, and they would go through some training sessions. And we have a full-time employee who does training by profession. And what she does is videos and training, and she works on helping our staff improve all of their training programs. So we're constantly improving our training programs and getting better and better, because, in every business, and especially animal welfare, it's always a work in progress. Nothing is ever done. You're always improving. So we're constantly improving these programs and getting a lot of feedback from our volunteers. After they've gone through their training, they do some mentoring sessions with volunteers. And then they're kind of like they're certified. The volunteer will say, I think this person's ready to, be a level 2 volunteer. And then they're able to become that. And then once they're there, they're happy. They can stay there, or if they want to move on to level 3, then they can request that, and they will get additional training. So it's kind of each department has a different way of training. For example, in our medical center and isolation area, there will be a couple volunteers that work with them and train them on how to gown up and, how to not spread disease, because that's a really critical component. In our medical center, we have a lot of contagious disease there, and we have quarantine areas and we have our isolation areas. So volunteers will get one-on-one training. We have a full-time volunteer manager at every one of our locations, and their job is to make sure to constantly be recruiting, scheduling volunteers. We have a volunteer that drives volunteers from our adoption center, which is a very, very nice location. Lots of volunteers live around there, but our medical center is in a harder to get to place. The parking isn't great. It's not as safe a neighborhood. We're where we need to be. We do a lot of our outreach from there. So we do have a transportation available every day for volunteers for 3 to 4 hour segments. They get driven there and go back. And that has helped a lot doing that, because we're constantly trying to grow our volunteer program in the medical center.
Oh, thanks for that, Paula. So how do you, this question just popped up, how do you fire a volunteer?
I could count on my right. Yes, we have 5. On my right, on one hand, I could count how many times we've had to do that. It's so few and far between. But we have, and usually it's, again, communicating, understanding, listening to what their situation is. When we realize they're just not really the right fit, what we usually do is ask them to take a leave of absence for a while, and that we'll consider them coming back, take some time off. They're obviously overstressed. Usually it kind of solves. They don't come back. They realize they move on. Yeah, we have never had, I would say in 20 years, I can recall, and I can probably only think of 3, maybe 4 volunteers we've had to do this with, which is pretty remarkable.
Excellent. Yes, it is very remarkable. So let's do one more poll question and get this one out of the way. Please answer on your screen. In what areas of your organization do you use volunteers? And this is a click all that applies. So check off everything that you use volunteers in, and we'll go to the results in just a few seconds. Adoption counseling, animal care, community outreach, dog training, play groups, dog walking, and submit your answers. Let's see what the audience said. Well, they're using all of those categories, Paula. That's pretty impressive. Community outreach,
That's
animal
great.
care are the top ones. Dog walking is next. And that kind of brings up something that I've noticed about PAWS Chicago's and your volunteer program. And you touched on this a minute ago, Paula, with the Dogtown Level 1, Level 2, Level 3. It seems to me like these are real opportunities to progress and to gain skills instead of just showing up to do insignificant jobs, which happens in a lot of cases at other shelters.
Right.
So
we don't want to give the volunteers the jobs we don't want to do.
Right. And so by having these different levels and these opportunities to grow in their job, even though it's volunteer, seems to be pretty important.
Absolutely. It's critical because it engages them. And engagement is what it's all about, engaging them in the movement, engaging them in the cause, engaging them in the work and the volunteer roles. And you know, they just are so, they're always thanking us. And we're like thanking them, and we have these events to thank the volunteers, and they're like, no, we want to thank you. My life is so different. I look forward all week to volunteering at PAWS. You know, it's the best part of what I do. And that's the kind of, you know, what we love hearing because it's such a win-win for the animals. And we don't want to forget about our cats. We have levels for cat volunteers too. So we do have specialized training. The gal that runs our adoption center cat program is fantastic, Erin, and she works one-on-one with volunteers, and she actually certifies the people to become level 2s for cats, and those are, you know, and can work with them. And almost all of our cat adoptions are done by volunteers. The cleaning, I mean, you go in, you see our volunteers all wear aprons, and we want them to, you know, so people know who the staff wear polo shirts and the volunteers wear the aprons. And depending on the color of the apron is basically the status of the volunteer, whether they're an adoption counselor, a level 1, 2, or 3. And it's really nice because you know who everybody is, and when they're new volunteers, they wear a little tag so that we want everyone to welcome them, because part of it is, you know, we don't want a volunteer to come in and just kind of feel lost, and we want them to feel very welcomed and a part of the culture. That picture, is that the picture that you have up right now, that gentleman, he's got a group of about 7 or 8 men. Every morning they're there at 7 a.m. and they are walking all the dogs. And it's pretty remarkable. They're level 3s. And this whole group of guys, they all met each other through PAWS, and now they've all become great friends. And it's really cute. They all buy a fur ball table together and they come to our events. But it's created a lifestyle for people. They meet people in the community. They meet their best friends. People will always say that at PAWS they've met their best friends because they're like-minded people who love animals and have that passion.
What insights, Paula, would you want to share with other organizations who may be struggling with their own volunteer programs?
I think it's top-down. I think the one thing that's been helpful is the fact that I've been the founder, the CEO. I am now the executive chair, and we have a CEO person who is an employee who's wonderful. But I will say that because it's top-down, I think the top has to embrace it. If you're struggling with the volunteer culture, then it's probably not being embraced from the top because they've got to bring it everywhere. And when people will say to us, well, volunteers are more difficult, and it's just, than it is. It'd be easier if we just could hire people. I just say, look, I'm a volunteer. PAWS wouldn't be here, and my daughter is a volunteer. She used to run our communications department, and now that's mostly done by staff, but she still helps a great deal with strategy. So volunteers are critical, life-saving and critical. This picture that's up there right now is from our black tie event. At our black tie event, we have 200 volunteers that night that we deploy. And those are all homeless animals that we bring, and we get most of them adopted that night. And it's great. So at every event, we use opportunities to get those little animals' faces in front of the public. And the volunteers do. I mean, we could not put on these events without our volunteers.
You can see the people in that picture that are wearing the lighter colored clothing. I guess they realize that animal hair shows up on black, right?
Yeah, right.
But when there's animal people, who cares?
Yeah.
Right.
There's a group of all of our volunteers now at our we do a run every year, a run walk, and we have a huge marathon team. We have one of the largest local Chicago Team PAWS marathon teams, but it's not just local. We're doing the New York Marathon this year. We're doing London. Actually, next week is the New York. We're doing Berlin, so people from all over the country can sign on for Team PAWS and run on in the marathon and raise money for homeless animals.
That's great. Would you like to take some questions from the audience, Paula? Because we have a
Sure.
lot. Okay.
Oh, wonderful.
Let's start with our audience Q&A. Do you have any suggestions on how to recruit men? That's
interesting. The one phenomena we have found out between men and women, we have more women than men. However, we find that when men do get involved, they become level 3s. And we're laughing. We're like, oh, my gosh. The men, when they get involved, they really want to move up. They're like not satisfied with level 1 or level 2. They want to be a level 3. So, and also maybe because they're big and strong, they can handle the bigger dogs. But I think we're getting more and more men, and I think, again, offering people really important, meaningful work, you will get more men and women, involved. And I think men coming and seeing other men helps because, obviously they don't want to be one guy there with, 200 women. So I think the fact we do have a lot of men, as you can see, a lot of men in our volunteer cadre, that helps in and of itself recruit. So it's kind of a self-fulfilling thing. The more you have, the more you get.
That's wonderful. So can you give some specifics on recruitment? What are some specific things that you do to recruit volunteers?
Everything we do, whether it's our magazine, we always ask people to come and volunteer or foster. So if we're doing a little TV thing with an adoptable dog, we always encourage the public to come and volunteer. It just jogs them because people don't always think about it. Like, wow, I'd love to do that. So every kind of materials we have, if we do events in the Petco's or PetSmarts, we always have flyers inviting people, inviting them and asking them. Our website has a huge area about volunteering, and we make it easy for them. They can sign up. They can come. We make it very easy for people to we don't make it hard. I know it's been really tough for some of the city shelters, the government shelters, because they have to require fingerprinting and what have you, and that really is an obstacle. But the easier you can make it for people to get engaged and to come, and then also to do follow-up to see how they're doing. We're actually improving that too, making sure that we send out surveys and that we make sure that the mentoring is done so that when they come back, they're greeted and we hear what they have to say about it so that they can really have a great, successful experience and invite, their friends to come. And we always say it's always helpful. Like we have a very wonderful volunteer development board, and they actually really help us with all of our special events. And they can become a member and bring their husband or their daughter or their son, and that makes it fun because then they don't come alone to the meetings. And then all of a sudden, the ice is broken and they get to meet people. And engaging people is everything, whether at any level of volunteering. It's getting them, engaged and to feel that what they're doing is meaningful.
It's interesting that you brought up development board because our next question is about your development board, which appears very large. And this audience member says that sounds like a volunteer position. Can you better describe it?
Yeah. So we have three boards that are volunteer. We have the board of directors, we have the development board, and we have the professional board. So our professional board is our young professionals, a little younger. They're very active in the Team PAWS, and they're very active in our run walk and our animal magnetism, which is our more of a young, fun kind of social event. And so they help us with that fundraising. They're an amazing, robust group of young professionals. Our development board, not always older, but sometimes the financial commitment's a little higher. They put on our fur ball, which is our black tie event, and our beach party, which is our summer event. So, we have to do a lot of events because, as we all know, in animals, we don't get any base funding. We get nothing from the government. It really is pure philanthropy. So special events help us a lot in helping our budget and enabling us to do the great things we do for animals. So our development board puts on those events. We have meetings in the city. We're starting to develop more development boards out in the suburbs because as Chicago is growing and traffic gets worse, a lot of our suburban development board members struggle coming down to the city for meetings, so we're starting to go out to them. So we have a North Shore Development Board. We go twice a year to, and we have a development, and then the city development board is 3 times a year, the meetings. And now we are actually looking at, we have some wonderful, very active donors and supporters that are looking at us increasing and adding a development board out in the Barrington, Inverness area. So we're excited about that because that's, again, reaching people. Our adopters are from all over, and everywhere we go, people say they've adopted from us. So we want to get them engaged more. We want to, we want them to not only adopt from us, we want them to think about fostering. We want to think about development board, helping us fundraise, helping us grow to save more and more animals every year.
What do you mean by financial commitment from your volunteers?
From the development board, the minimum annual is about $1,000 a year. From the professional board, I think it's about $250. So that's the minimum. Now, if you don't want to, you're not in a financial position to do that, you could just volunteer as a volunteer, which is no financial commitment at all. It's your time.
Right.
So we have different levels. Yeah.
Okay. Thanks. Here's our next question.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have resources on training, contact resolution? No, I guess that means conflict resolution, documentation, videos, etc., that you can share with other organizations?
We are working on training videos. We are working on a lot of things like that. We have right now. We have manuals that that when we do some one-on-one training at the different levels that we could share. We are going to be starting to do more and more videos. With our adoption counselors, for example, they have basically a booklet they read to learn everything, and then they will do one-on-one mentoring. And then once they feel comfortable, then they do the adoption counseling themselves, and then they're watched by a mentor. And then given the final approval that they're able to go out on their own if they're comfortable with it. And so we do have some materials, and we are constantly adding more and really growing the area. We would eventually love to be able to do some of this online where people could volunteer and do some of the initial training just on the website. And that would be a goal down the road for us. Because anyway, whether we're training someone for PAWS or if they're living somewhere else, they could be learning about anything we teach people. They learn more about animals. The communication is a win-win for the animals.
Excellent. Here's our next question. We're exploring the various volunteer management systems. Do you use one that you would recommend?
The one we use right now, the Logistics, is it's okay. I think we're going to be probably changing as we're moving into our new Salesforce. We're considering moving into Salesforce. They actually have software available that is connected with Salesforce and that's free. So we may be moving in that direction this next year. We're going to be doing that kind of after our event season is over. January, February, March is our slow time, we call it, and that's when we can kind of start implementing new programs and things and getting everyone trained up. so I don't think, I mean, we are using Volgistics. It works. It's not something we'd highly recommend.
Thank you. Here's the next one.
Yeah.
Our shelter is getting ready to implement customer service positions for volunteers. Any advice on training?
Oh yeah, that is great. Really wonderful. You first of all, it's selecting. Not all volunteers are good at customer service, and that's an area we found. We have volunteers that are just amazing with the animals, and amazing working with the animals, and we have volunteers that are just great with people. You cannot put people in a lot. Let's face it, a lot of people in our field love animals, and they're not always. They don't have quite those same communication skills with people. So you have to make sure that when you have people in customer service that they like to smile and they love people as much as they love animals. And I think that's probably one of the biggest challenges in animal shelters, because we tend to find a lot of people that love animals, and they, but people aren't always on the same level. So you got to find those people, and those are the people you got to put at your customer service desk that are really understanding and happy and love people and want to help them. And so it's not everybody that wants to do it is a good fit. And sometimes, really understanding and making sure that we direct them into where they're going to succeed is really important.
That's great. What is your training program for adoption counselors? We're revamping ours, but I'm new to the animal rescue sector, and I feel lost.
Okay. Well, what adoption counselors do is we have this new kind of booklet that we've put out that they kind of read through and understand everything about, what we're looking for, how, and a lot of the processes. And then they do a lot of mentoring with an adoption counselor. They just sit with them and they watch them and they observe, and they have to go through a dog and a cat if they're going to do both. They get to do several adoptions. And then when they're ready on their own and they feel comfortable, because it's a big responsible position, and you have to really, you don't want that, then they are going to be, their mentor will watch and observe them and let them handle a few adoptions until they feel they're really ready to do it on their own. And then we, of course, always have meetings, constant meetings with our adoption counselors, and Melissa Dragovan, who heads our whole adoption counseling, and for their input, things at work, ideas for constantly improving. So nothing ever stays the same in a robust organization. You're constantly improving.
Other than volunteer manager at each location, are there any other staff members utilized solely for coordination of volunteers?
Well, we have our director of volunteer services, and we also have 2 volunteer managers. But that's just where they're dealing solely with volunteers. But everyone in every department is dealing with volunteers. So even in our database, we have volunteers that come in and help us in database. There isn't anyone that doesn't work with volunteers in their selected areas. But the actual managers and director, their job is, really for staffing the large volumes of volunteers that are being recruited and, overseeing the whole program at large.
How do you address compassion fatigue situations with volunteers?
Fortunately, because we're no-kill, we probably have a lot less of that. The stories are really good. I think the problem we have with some of the compassion fatigue or some of our volunteers volunteer for us and animal care and control. And I think that emotion gets them. And, I'm the first to admit it. I went to the City Pound when I saw, back when I went the first time, they were in gas chambers. And I went in the back and literally took pictures and blew them up and showed, the gas chambers were removed about a year later. But I could never be in that. I just can't. I know myself. I know my limitations. And so I understand and I know that is a very difficult situation. And I would say probably that they should probably balance that, maybe do less, maybe 1 or 2 days a week and not so much, and couple it with good things. It's very difficult, especially if it's a city agency that's not no-kill or a private shelter. I would just say in a private shelter, they have the choice of being no-kill. They don't have to, be taking in more animals than they can save. That's kind of what we do. We have a managed admission, which means we have so many resources. We use our resources to life-saving. If, I always couple it to an orphanage. Would you support an orphanage that could save 1,000 children a year that took in 5,000 and killed the excess? Of course not. So private shelters have that choice. A government agency, I understand, they don't always have that choice. They have to take them all in, and until the sheltering community around works hard enough to, bring those numbers down, and our focus always was spay-neuter. We focused much more on spay-neuter than we did adoption because we knew we were not going to adopt our way out of the problem. So the first thing we opened before we opened an adoption center was our Neuter Clinic. And we do about 18,000 spay-neuter surgeries a year. Most of them are done free or very low cost, subsidized. We are located in a very poor community because the under-resourced neighborhoods are where the problem is, and that's why we're there. We have lots of volunteers that go door to door. We have a wonderful PAWS for Life program where we go door to door in some of the most under-resourced communities. We help people's animals. We get them, fixed, medical care. And I think by addressing the problem head-on like that, we're really able to reduce the number of animals. So when we started PAWS, there were 29,000 animals entering our City of Chicago City Pound. They had 14,000 animals entering last year. They were euthanizing when we started. From 29,000 entering, they were euthanizing 26,000. Last year they had 14,000 enter, and they euthanized 5,000. Still too many, but you know what? The direction is great. They have a 90% save rate for cats, and we're working harder on the dogs. We've had a lot of problems in our city pound with the CIV, the influenza. So, but we're working really hard at PAWS. We're working to triple our medical isolation and quarantine so we can take more CIV dogs into our program. And because we have to hold them for about 30 days, which has really put a huge financial burden on all the rescues and shelters in the Chicago area. And so we're working to expand our medical center so we can take more of those animals in.
That's great.
So it is tough. I think, I would say if it's a challenge, go to a no-kill shelter that's progressive. I think you'll feel much more, positive about the life-saving work.
Very good. So this next one is about liability issues, and how do you handle that? This person says, my finance department will nix some programs if they're concerned about the danger to volunteers, i.e. play groups, working with very sick animals, working with bite cases, etc.
Well, I would say that we've had hardly zero liability issues with volunteers, probably more with staff. So I think it really comes down to training. And I think liability is sometimes often an excuse for people not wanting to. When you hear that, oh, we can't do that for this or that. You work with your insurance company. If you have good training for your volunteers and your staff. In fact, it was funny. At one point, we had so much new staff. We were saying our volunteers were better trained. We had to really start focusing on better training for our staff because there were so many new ones. And so I think it really does come down to working with sick animals. There's not liability if you have the right processes and protocols. Bite cases, we only let our level 3s, and sometimes if the dog is highly concerning, it will be only certain staff members or certain volunteer level 3s that are really able, that the dog is receptive to, and we work very closely. But I don't think that you ever have to nix a program because you're not managing it well. It really comes down to managing it better.
That's a great answer. Paula, does PAWS accept any court-ordered community service, school community service, or do you focus on all your efforts on more likely regular volunteers?
We do the school community service. So what we have, which is really great, because with the young children, we just aren't in a position right now. We'd love to have children's programs, but it's just like on our list of things with the life-saving work and, we have to do. So what we did is we started what we call family service. So kids can come in if they're under 18 with their parents. So we get a lot of 10, 11, 12-year-olds that come in with their mom or dad. They sign a waiver. They're working with them. They're either greeters at the front door, or they'll help with cleaning, or they'll help with the kits, or they'll help with the dog areas, but they're under the parent's supervision. And they do sign a waiver. And that's a nice way of incorporating kids into it. As far as community service, like high school, we do have a lot of things on our website. We have a list of things we ask them to do. We ask them to do, they can do, they can do sell things, they can do promotions, they can do fundraisers. We have the create your own fundraisers that we offer. We get a lot of bar mitzvahs. People just do wonderful things for the animals. And we offer them lots of suggestions and ideas so that they can go out and become our ambassadors in the community.
That's great. Here's another question. I'm having difficulty between senior founder-type staff and volunteers, often conflicting over issues of protectiveness, the right way to do it. I want volunteers to feel valued. It's difficult with important staff members criticizing their every move.
Okay, difficulty between senior founder staff and volunteers. So it's kind of like old school versus new school, right? They want to change things and do things differently. I would say, obviously, it has to come from the leadership at the top, the direction and the strategy and the way it's going, and maybe the founding staff and volunteers have a lot of experience. Maybe it sounds like a communication issue. I think that, we've had the same problem with lots of young people that come to work here and, want to do things differently. And what they don't have is the years of experience of knowing why those things aren't working and why we've done them and haven't. And oftentimes we're just so busy we don't have the time to really explain it to them. And we've tried all of that, and this is why we've gone in this direction. Look, not everybody's always going to agree, but the idea is I think communication is critical, and I think we ourselves are guilty of not even having sometimes the time to communicate that. And I do think some of the younger, newer staff that come on board don't understand why we're doing things a certain way, and we just need to really up our communications and do a better job. So I think the criticizing, and that's coming out of frustration, and it really comes down to communication.
It does. Yes, it does. So do you have a hard time recruiting volunteers for the door-to-door program? I think that's your PAWS for Life.
We don't. And yeah.
You don't?
Okay. So, and the reason we don't is the woman that runs the program is the most amazing woman who truly is a life force of goodness and love. And when you're with her, you just feel like, you can fly into anywhere and do anything because she's so positive. She's a trained social worker. She loves people equally. She is so kind. She has no judgment. You can't get into being judgmental. Not everybody is the same with animals. We all started differently. Let's go back and look at the way our parents were, our grandparents were with animals. Always there's a progression in life. And we have to be understanding of different people and their culture and what they've been experiencing. I always think of my grandparents were from Greece. They thought dogs should be outside. They were horrified that I would let my dogs on my bed. This is just the progression, but they ended up loving my dogs so much they let them on their bed. It was an education. And whenever we go into some of these communities, I'll say, you know what, you'll teach your parents. I taught my parents, and it really is the children that teach us. It was my daughter that got me to start PAWS because she was volunteering at a kill shelter. I didn't even know shelters killed. And she kept saying, Mom, if you love animals, you got to help them. And I do love animals. I'd never volunteered. I'd never been in a shelter. And, she opened my eyes. So I think when you believe in people and you understand and you're not judgmental and you work with them and you help them, we don't walk in and go, you got to spay and neuter your dogs because they're going to be turned off immediately. What we do is we go, and how can we help you? Oh, you need some training. We give them some training tips. We bring them food. These are really, really poor communities. People are giving their food stamps and their food for their animals. They love their animals. And Lurie always says, resources doesn't mean lack of love. A lack of resources doesn't mean a lack of love. These people love their animals, so we do. And if we see that, there's some negligence, we work with them on that too and help them and alleviate their burdens so that those animals are not in harm's way. So it's really, people will come back and go, all right, Lurie, I want to fix my animals now. She doesn't try and, criticize and condone. She really works with the community, and they follow her like the Pied Piper. They bake cakes for her. I mean, when we pull up, literally, I will walk into my building, my doorman will come up to me, and he goes, "I'm from Inglewood, and I love the program you're doing there. I hear all about it from all my friends." So that's the kind of messaging you want, and they trust you. They trust us. They trust PAWS. They know we're there to help them and help their animals. So I would say, you're free to come out and visit us in Chicago and just work with Lurie and see the magic she does.
Excellent. So how many volunteers participate in the PAWS for Life program?
She has about 30 active ones. And what they do is they go around, they're there like 3-4 days a week and then going door to door, signing people up, getting them set up. We work with churches. We bring our spay-neuter van in. First we do vaccination clinics. We'll do free vaccines because you get everybody engaged with that. Then we'll work with them on spaying and neutering. And we'll set up appointments. So we'll either drive them or sometimes they'll come on their own. We'll set their appointments up at the Neuter Clinic. And then we'll also bring our spay-neuter van out to the community and work with the church. We use the church basement for setting up all the crates so that when the animals are done, the actual spay-neuter van is just used as a surgical room. And then the animals are brought down to recover with volunteers, and then the guardians come back and pick up their pets at the end of the day.
Well, she sounds like a fantastic person. Here's the next question, Paula. We have a hard time getting volunteers to commit to a schedule, although they spend a lot of time and they're very good. Do you have any suggestions?
Yeah, I think if you explain to them that we can't run the program without knowing, it's okay if you want to volunteer once a month or twice a month or 3 times, but just let us know what you absolutely can do, because that's how we can run a program. And I think they really understand the value of that and how important that is. They will, again, it's communicating that, how important we'd love, you can't just walk in and say, I'm going to volunteer. We have to know. On Mondays we have a hard time getting volunteers, so a whole group come in on Mondays, and they've become a really great close-knit group. They're the Monday group, And so I think it's really communicating to the volunteers when we're really short, what we really need. We really needed to ramp up our medical center volunteers, and we've got so many more going there, and they'll say to me, oh, I love going down there. It's really like ground zero, because that's where the animals first come in. So you'll see the abuse cases. You'll see the police. A lot of police will bring us animals. And, you'll see really sad situations, but then you'll see them leaving there and going to the adoption center looking great, So it's where a lot of the miracles happen, and the more they go down there, the more they feel like, yeah, we want to go there. We used to have a hard time getting volunteers. We're really growing that because it's important.
How long are the orientations, the first intro session into volunteering?
And I'm going to say about an hour, but what we usually do at the orientation is we have people sign up at that point. So at the end of that, they're signing up, because we don't want to wait for them to come back and sign up. We want to always give them something, and things do move. It could be possibly that they even sign up and get started in their area the first night. We don't want to lose that momentum. You don't want them to come back for this and come back for that, and you're going to lose them. You got to get them engaged. You got to give them a job. You got to show them how exciting it is from the get-go, and that way you want to keep them so that they'll come back.
Do you conduct an ongoing or periodical evaluation of volunteers? For example, Joan, who does probably one of the most really critical areas working with the dogs in the training and the behavior modification. She works one-on-one and with the volunteers, and basically she will not promote someone to a level 3 until they've done hands-on work with her and she's observed them. And then to get to a level 3, they've done the training, she might, keep them longer. But yeah, she will work one-on-one for sure with those volunteers. With adoption counseling, no, I don't think. I think if there are issues, Melissa would just handle it one-on-one if there's any problems. But we don't have like one standard. I think depending on the areas of where they're working, we constantly, the people that are in charge will be working with them. And if someone's needing a little more work, we'll spend some time helping them get up to speed. But we don't have like a blanket evaluation thing, no. How do you engage one-time volunteers? For example, corporate groups or service clubs who want to volunteer as a group.
Right. And we don't want to turn them away because, you know what, that brings a lot of, we have a lot of corporate volunteers. They'll have corporate day. So we have, we actually have one person who is a volunteer who runs that, and she does a lot of it from her home, and she schedules it. And we have, set things at our adoption center that they can do. So if it's school groups, they might be putting, those cones together and doing some stuffing. And we give them a variety of things so they're not totally bored, and they get to do different things. If it's a corporate group, sometimes, like if we need some painting done, we'll buy the paint. We'll have our maintenance guy there, and he'll kind of work with them, and we'll give people different things. And we had an investment bank group came, and they painted our whole deck area last summer, and so we'll give special projects depending. But we do like them to come, and first they get the video, they learn a little bit about PAWS, about no kill, about what we're about, and to get them engaged, and then they'll do a work together as a group. And sometimes we'll split them up if it's a large group, and some will go cats, some will go dogs, and they'll work with our existing volunteers, and they'll have aprons on. They have a special color apron, so we know that they're just there for the day, so everybody knows, they don't know everything. You can kind of help them out. And I think that, that positive engagement, and then many of them come back and volunteer after that.
Well, we have several more questions. We can go on for a few more minutes. If the audience would like to stay with us, we'll get Paula to try to answer more of your questions. This next one says, we are a small rural area, total volunteer. Suggestions to recruit volunteers, please. I like your college recruiting, and I feel that we need to tap into this some more.
Yeah, definitely. Just constantly go down there, get to know the people at the school, talk about the need, get them engaged. They'll help you. They'll put the signs in the right places. They'll make sure they're up there. They'll put them in the newspaper, their little paper. I think that's really important because people that love animals want to help. And it's really finding them in these areas. Grocery stores are another great place. You can ask the grocery store, put a table out in front. A little table and just table, have your materials, maybe if they let you have a little puppy or a little kitten there, and you can talk to people and they come up and go, there's a lot of people that have excess time, and even if it's one day a week, what a wonderful thing. So think about your grocery stores, think about places where, the community are always going to really have, and we still do a lot of work in grocery stores in our North Shore. We get our young people, high school, we tell them, why don't you go to the grocery stores and table? We'll get you a puppy that day, and you guys can start recruiting people, and they love doing that.
Here's a good question. Do you have volunteers that work with social media? If so, what do you have them do, and how do you regulate that?
We do. We actually have a wonderful volunteer who's helped us a lot. Our staff that's involved in our communications work with the few volunteers that are very, very good at social media. They're super smart. They understand our messaging, which is really critical. And so I think that the volunteers that do that are basically interns. So once they do an internship, they're there. They really learn all of our protocols. They learn, what's important, and it's all directed by the staff person as far as how many we do, so that we're not overwhelming people with that. But it's been really helpful having interns and having volunteers help the staff. It's also good because you get some outside perspective,
Yes. Okay, so could you share if you have any process in place for volunteers if they're inactive for a certain period? If you do, what steps do you take?
Yeah, I think usually when volunteers become inactive, it's usually sometimes, look, they may have things come up. They have family issues. They have to be inactive for a while, which is fine. We certainly understand they're always welcome to come back. When life gets in the way of many things. We've all had that happen to us, so that is not a problem. We don't, we're scheduling, we're constantly recruiting, so we know who the active ones are, and usually if they're not, they'll tell us. A lot of our volunteers go away in the winter in Chicago, so we have volunteers that are gone for 3-4 months in the winter, and then they come back, and, we know that. we're very flexible. Same with our development board. I'll tell people, we may have 3-4 meetings a year, but if you come to 1 or 2, we're happy. We don't have this, rules that you've got to do this, this, and this. We really want to be engaging and make it available because people will do what they can, and every little bit helps.
Great. Well, let's take one more question, Paula, and then we'll finish up for the evening. This one is referring to my comments at the beginning. Do the 17,000 volunteer hours include foster hours?
I don't think they do. No, I don't think we've included our foster hours. That would be that is actually just volunteering at our locations and our special events. So some of those volunteers might be just we do a lot of adoption events because we really want to get the awareness out there, and so we'll have volunteers that will just volunteer once or twice a year at our adoption events, but they've been doing it for years. So no, the fosters are not included in that. We have at all times.
You have a lot more than 117,000
We
hours.
do. We do.
Yes,
we have at all times. We have close to 200 animals, 250 animals in foster care at all times. So if you look at our inventory list, our city pound has about 400 animals. PAWS has in its program at all times anywhere between 450 and 600 animals in it. 250 of those animals are in foster homes.
That's amazing, Paula. You are doing such wonderful work there, you, your staff, and all of your volunteers. And Chicago is lucky to have someone of your caliber to lead the way.
Well, thank you so much. As you know, it's a labor of love for all of us, and we do have a great staff and an amazing volunteer group, and it's worked out really well for these thousands of animals.
Wow, that's great. Okay, so that's the end of our event tonight. We want to thank Paula and all of you for your time. We invite you to take a few minutes to complete our survey. Your feedback is important to us. Click on the link on your screen, and if for some reason you don't see the link, it is also in the resource file at the bottom of your screen. The link will also be emailed to you in a few days. And this webcast will be available on demand shortly, and we hope you will share this presentation on your social sites. Please take advantage of our free on-demand webcasts available on our website at maddiesfund.org. And plan to join us on December 7th for a webcast with America's veterinarian, Dr. Marty Becker, who will be talking about Fear Free, a certification program for veterinarians, vet techs, and clinic managers taking the pet out of petrified. Thanks again for being here with us this evening. Good night.